Test one, two, test one, two. Everyone, and welcome to the Chatham Select Board meeting of January 24th, 2023. Let the record show the meeting started at 5:31. Pursuant to Governor Baker's July 16th, 2022 signing of an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, including the extension of his March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, until March 31st, 2023, this meeting of the Chatham Select Board is being conducted in person and via remote participation. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen to this meeting while in progress may do so by calling the phone number 1-508-945-4410, conference ID 203-386-491 #, or join the meeting online via Microsoft Teams through the link in the posted agenda. While this is a live broadcast and simulcast on Channel 18, despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide for real-time access. We will post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as is possible. Okay, good evening, everyone, and we'll do a roll call. Mr. Nicastro.
Present.
Ms. Davis.
Present.
Mr. Shell.
Present.
Mr. Metters.
Present.
And Mr. Dykens is present as well. The first order of business is our acceptance of our minutes of January 17th, 2023. A motion?
So moved.
And a second. Thank you. Edits, okay. Mr. Nicastro had his hands up first, and then Mr. Shell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 2, under the public announcements portion, the very first sentence, I have a couple of additions in the second line, about a third of the way in, where it says results of the feasibility. After the word "the" and before feasibility, I would like to insert preliminary investigation of the, and at the end of that sentence, after the phrase active living, put a comma and add, and asked for an agenda item update. And asked for an agenda item update, period. Thank you.
Is that it, Mr. Nicastro?
Yes.
Mr. Shell.
Yeah, I mean, this was Ms. Gibbs' comment, but as I recall it, her focus, I'm on page 2, number 3,
Yep.
Public comments on business agenda. She indicates the proposed position of the airport administrator should be the staff of the airport commission. I just didn't remember that the focus was so much the placement of the staff or the reporting, which the town council had, town manager had made clear was a town position. And as I say, my recollection was the focus was the payment rather than where the reporting was.
Yeah, I would agree.
And my second, and by the way, I shared some typos
Yep.
heretofore. On page 6, the third paragraph up from the bottom that begins with Director Halala said $250,000 has been programmed. I think the meaning of that is $50,000 a year for 5 years, not $250 a year, although we'll take $250 a year if that was the intention.
I believe you're correct, Mr.
Yeah,
Shell.
thank you.
So we'll change that. Okay, any other comments? Okay, we'll take a vote. Mr. Nicastro.
Aye.
Ms. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Shell.
Aye.
Mr. Metters.
Aye.
And the chair says aye as well. The next item on our agenda this evening is a public hearing. Max Seafood Increase Sewer Flow Request for additional seating at 1291 Main Street. Dr. Bob, if you're online, you certainly may comment, and I'll have Mr. Shell read the clerk's announcement here of the public hearing. Mr. Shell.
Notice is hereby given that the Chatham Select Board will hold a public hearing in accordance with Article 2 of the Chatham Sewer Department Rules and Regulations on Tuesday, January 24, 2023 at 5:30 p.m. in the large meeting room at the Town Hall Annex, 261 George Ryder Road, to consider a request from South Chatham Seafood LLC doing business as Max Seafood for an increase in the sewer flow of 4,865 gallons per day, I think that is GBT, to support an increase of 139 indoor and outdoor seats. All interested parties are encouraged to participate. Signed, the Select Board.
Thank you, Mr. Shell. Okay, Dr. Duncanson, I see you there. I'm going to recognize you and maybe walk us through this a bit.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. When we updated the water and sewer regulations, or when you updated the water and sewer regulations back in 2019, we kept provisions in there regarding review of requests for sewer flow increases for both residential property, which are really handled at the staff level because basically one additional bedroom is allowed for properties that go onto the sewer. And then there was also a provision for non-single family residential properties, places like commercial properties, industrial properties, mixed use, multifamily, or institutional, that they would have to go before your board as water and sewer commissioners for approval of requests for increased flow. And this is basically, for want of a better term, a throwback to those years when we were under DEP's administrative consent order and had basically a sewer bank at the time. And so we had an allotment of flow that the board could allocate based on requests from entities in the community. And when we finished the comprehensive wastewater management plan and we started down the road of implementation, and we were able to get DEP to rescind the administrative consent order, there was still interest in the community to have flow requests from residential properties and commercial properties go through some approval process. So in 2019, when we updated the sewer regulations, we put a new section into Article 2 that talks about these flow requests being approved. And as I indicated, residential ones are pretty much handled at the staff level, but under Section B, these requests do come to you. They go through the Water and Sewer Advisory Committee first, where the applicant makes their presentation to them. They make a recommendation to you. It then comes to you for the public hearing and a final disposition. As I indicated in my memo, Max Seafood is currently permitted for 48 seats by the Health Division. They had come before the Planning Board to increase the number of seats, which they did ultimately get approval from the Planning Board. So they met all the other Planning Board requirements to do so, including looking at parking and all the other ancillary issues that the Planning Board looks at with regard to increased development. So they are now before you seeking approval for an additional 139 seats that would be split, as indicated in my memo, between indoor and outdoor seating. And that would equate to approximately, or not approximately, but equate to 4,865 gallons a day in additional flow for the sewer, with the expectation, they would not necessarily be using all 4,865 on any particular day, unless it happens to be a very busy day and every seat is full. And so that is the basis of the request before you, and I believe that representatives from Max Seafood are on the meeting tonight and will be happy to answer any further questions, as I would be as well.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bob. Appreciate that. Mr. Nicastro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I ask a question of Dr. Duncanson?
You sure?
So, Bob, in an exchange you had with the Select Board member Davis today, you quoted the regulation, or I guess it's the bylaw of the town. And I remember a number of us were involved intimately in the creation of that bylaw. So I'm trying to understand what the standard is that we're supposed to follow for allowing this. The regulation literally says, the bylaw literally says, such requests may be granted contingent upon determination of compliance with the rules and regulations of the sewer department. I assume that's all the technical stuff.
Yep.
And parity with septic system flow. What does that mean? And I understand the historical context that you just laid out about what led to this bylaw. What should we be looking for?
Yeah,
That's what I really want to
This
know.
is actually in the regulations, not in the bylaw. It's
Okay,
actually in the
okay.
water and sewer regulations that fall under your purview as water and sewer commissioners. You know, when this was being drafted, there was discussion about providing the select board, if you will, criteria upon which to evaluate requests such as this. But the ultimate decision was made not to provide any criteria because it was more of the community need and Chatham factor, as we call it, that goes into these. You know, up to you in terms of, you know, improving economic conditions, improving additional job opportunities in the community. In this particular case, this property is already on sewer, and so the septic would not necessarily come into play. But generally, you know, we were looking at and providing you the flexibility to say, well, even if there was a septic system, if there was a septic system in this property, it could not handle the 139 additional seats. But because they're on sewer, they provide a service to the community. It provides jobs. It provides economic, you know, opportunity. Those are the kinds of things that you get to weigh as the water and sewer commissioners in deciding whether or not this rises to, for want of a better term, the level of community need and community support.
So the phrase septic parity, does that reflect what you just said? If you couldn't, you could only allot the same amount of gallonage that a septic system would provide on a particular property? Is that what that meant? I think that, I remember the discussions about standards, because I think I brought those up myself, but a criteria, but I'm not sure we ever made a formal decision not to go in that direction. It just didn't happen. But anyway, maybe
the septic parity would be if you know, if you wanted to, you could take a look at a piece of property and make a determination whether or not, to what level of wastewater flow could that property handle under a septic system. I will tell you, based on my experience working with engineers, that engineers could design just about anything. And so if, you know, if the property owner went to an engineer and said, you know, design me a septic system that could handle 139 additional seats on this piece of property, given the size of the property, more than likely the septic system could be designed. It may not be inexpensive, but the septic system could be designed with today's technology to handle additional flow. And I've found that to be pretty much the case across the board with the technologies that are available today. An engineer can pretty well design a septic system capable of handling just about anything. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the direction we were going in with septic parity, if you will.
That's helpful, and this is the first of this type of appeal that we've had under this regulation, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah, since the changes in 2019, this is really the first one we've had in the commercial or the non-residential side of things, yes.
So consistent with the concepts that you articulated a couple of minutes ago, I think if the board were to take a reasonable approach, take all those factors into consideration, that we would be acting in accordance with the, I know you're not a lawyer, but I think we would be acting in accordance with the regulation. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Yes, Mr. Nacastro. Ms. Davis?
So from what I'm hearing is that we're basing our decision on sort of like a Chatham factor, weighing in on the quality of customer demand and whatnot as a factor. And, you know, if anybody drove by that seafood restaurant anytime this summer, they saw lines out the door. It's very popular and well-attended almost every day in the summer. The one question I have, though, is since that is there's several businesses on that site, does this decision, if we were to approve this septic increase, Does this limit the opportunity of the other businesses on that site to, if they so choose, request any additional sewage?
No, we have to look at each one individually, and they would come in with their own proposal, and that would come back to you, and you could weigh that. You know, I guess one thing to keep in mind is you don't have to approve 139 additional seats. You could approve some other number. That is just the difference between what they are currently approved for and what the planning board basically approved them for. So the planning board approved their full request or full change up to 187 seats. Your board is the Water and Sewer Commissioners. You could find that, you know, for any number of the reasons that we just talked about, you're not comfortable going up to the full height of the number, but somewhere less than that. That's your prerogative. My recommendation was to go ahead and approve the full amount. One thing we did do is I did base it on the highest flow for restaurant seats under Title V. I used the 35 gallons per day, which is basically the number that is used in the Title V regulations and by the state when we calculate wastewater flow for a full service restaurant, meaning they have, you know, chinaware and silverware that has to be washed and all. This case is somewhere in between. There's two levels that we can use: 35 gallons per day for a full service restaurant, and then there's a fast food category at 20 gallons per day. And fast food we don't really have in Chatham, but that's where, you know, you go in, you get your food in a bag or whatever, and you go somewhere else to eat it. There's no silverware to be washed, there's no dishes to be washed, and whatnot. My understanding from the conversations with Max, and as I said, they have represented on it, they are somewhere kind of in between. But, you know, we had the 20 and the 35 to use, so I erred on the side of the higher number with the expectation that their actual flow is likely to be less.
So our decision, if we decided to decrease the number of seats, would just be an arbitrary decision? It wouldn't be based on any real reasoning?
Right, it would be an arbitrary decision that you could make. You know, like I say, the planning board said they had enough parking and all the other things the planning board looked at, which is one of the requirements in the regulation, is they have to have all other, as quoted, all other necessary local approvals have been issued. In this case, they needed planning board approval, and they got that.
Okay, thank you for the clarifications.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Down the line, any other comments or questions or anything? Mr. Shell? Yeah, sorry about that, Mr. Shell, then
Thought it was me.
Mr. Metters. Sorry about
Well, just to follow up on Shireen's question, I guess if I understand your explanation correctly, this differential between fast food and full-service restaurant and the fact that they're kind of in the middle would tend to strengthen their application for the 139, given that we would anticipate a less flow than that maximum. Is that a fair summary of what you're telling us?
That is a fair way to look at it, yes.
Okay, and then the only other question I would ask you is are there any factors here that I'm missing? I know you can't read my mind, but is there some contrary consideration, some reservation in this whole business that we ought to at least think about, and we can decide to go ahead, but we've considered that, let's call it negative criterion?
I'm not aware of any, but that really is the purpose of the fact that you're holding a public hearing on this, is to hear whether or not there are any other concerns within the community about this.
Okay.
The Water and Sewer Advisory Committee did review it and did recommend, if you will, approval.
And I saw there are conditions to the planning board approval. Have they been fulfilled, or are they still in the process? And I know there's no uncertainty as to their being fulfilled, but just for good order's sake, do you happen to know if they've been fulfilled?
I do not know offhand if they have
Okay.
submitted that site plan yet.
Maybe that's
Revised site
something
plan.
that Max can answer whenever they stand up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shell. Mr. Metters?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I mean, like has been mentioned, you drive by there, it's definitely got a following. It's definitely been a successful business. I've enjoyed many a meal there myself. So the need is definitely there. The ask for 139 seats, we really should probably break it down because it is only 41 indoor and 98 outdoor. So the outdoor seats are going to be impacted kind of on the weather and the season. So if we're going to analyze any deeper the seating, maybe the outdoor seats would worth a further conversation, but I don't think 41 indoor seat is that unreasonable for the how it's laid out. So the 41 indoor seats doesn't bother me at the least. 98 outdoor seats will be those people who are on a good weather day, later at night, sitting on the picnic tables, enjoying their meals. I think the structure and the setup is capable of doing this type of volume without being disruptive to the community. That's my own personal opinion. Obviously, if there was any negative impact, the neighbors and whatever are gonna voice their opinion, and you'll have to address that accordingly. But I don't find this overly concerning. It is a high number. I mean, it's the first really ask we've had. So, of course, it's going to be a high number. My only other 2 cents I want to put into, and this is not particularly to the business itself, but obviously the increase in seating will create increase in traffic, which will increase the site itself. I would just ask that maybe they would monitor traffic flow a little bit. You have that unique, one entrance and then exit, where you can go left and right. And then there's been a number of times I've seen cars entering the wrong way. It's just part of that site. But if maybe just take a good monitoring approach, maybe at some point in time, better signage to let people know this is not the way to enter this property, might be appropriate. There's never been any major accidents that I'm aware of there, but just a kind of a thought for the property owner and the tenants that they may want to just kind of keep an eye on that to make improvements if they feel it's necessary. But I think it's a reasonable request. Again, the indoor seats doesn't bother me at the least. If we want to have a more in-depth discussion about the 98 outdoor seats, I'm open, but I think it's a reasonable request.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Metters. I have a couple of comments and I guess a couple of questions as well. Just so I'm clear, they have 48 seats indoor. They want to add 41 indoor, and they're asking for 98 outdoor seats. Well, how many outdoor seats do they have now? And there's additional space being created for the 41 more seats to the west side of the restaurant? I see Mr. Hay is online, and Mr. Burgess, I believe I saw his name earlier. If they want to address that, Mr. Hay, welcome. Mr. Mack?
Thank you.
Hi, Derek Burgess. I'm the
Hi,
project
Derek.
manager.
Yep.
Mac has asked me to start off, and he can chime in should he feel there's anything that needs to be added. So the 98 outdoor seats are actually already there. They're used seasonally. We've never had to have them permitted before because I'm not sure if it was a COVID thing or I'm fairly new to this property, so I'm not sure how they all came about, but as I understand it, those seats they did not have to meet any approval process originally. So those 98 seats have been there and been operational for the past 3 or 4 seasons since we've owned the property. So there's really no increase in space on the outside, and there's no increase in seating on the outside. The 41 additional indoor seats will be in the old fish market space that was to the right of the restaurant. We have moved the fish market over to the other side of the cornfield building, so that old fish market space is now vacant. Excuse me. And we would like to add the 41 seats in there and combine it with the 48 that we have in the existing restaurant.
Okay, that's helpful. I think the 98, the outdoor seating did occur during COVID, and so I have a couple comments. I take comfort in that you've really been operating what you're asking for, except for the 41 additional indoor seats, and you've built the restaurant out to take care of those 41. So I'm comfortable there. Just a question: the 35 gallons times the 139, that's the maximum additional capacity that we're being asked to add, Dr. Duncanson, right? So it's just 35
Yes.
times one, but that's a max. That's assuming that, if they were at max capacity all the time, that's how much flow they'd be having. And they certainly are probably very close to that July and August, but otherwise kind of not. I view Max as a great asset for the town and for Chatham. It's an incredibly popular restaurant. I take comfort that the planning board signed off on it and the Water and Sewer Advisory Committee has signed off on the request as well. So I'm gonna weigh in favor of this request now that I understand it. This is a public hearing. I often forget that's a public hearing, so if there's anybody in the public, either here, present in person and/or online, that would like to speak to this issue, please raise your hands. And I see no one in person, and I see no one online unless someone tells me otherwise. Jill, do you see anybody online? Okay. All right, so that being said, that's our public hearing. Mr. Shell, please.
Yeah, now that we have the Max representatives on,
Yep.
can you just address my question about the status of the conditions to the planning board approval?
I'd be happy to, sir.
Thank you.
So we have all of those conditions that we agreed to in our planning board approval are part of the renovation plan and will be completed as part of the build out of the old fish market space. Obviously, we have to satisfy all of those conditions in order to get our permit signed off and get our certificate of occupancy. So we will most definitely be doing all of those things. And part of those conditions are increased signage and lighting and striping on the parking and the entry and exit. Egresses and ingresses for the parking area so that we can make that place as safe as possible. There's going to be a bit of a learning curve because there's not a lot of those types of entrances and exits being like they are set up there. So I think with better striping and signage and better lighting, we'll do everything in our power to make that as safe as possible. And we are definitely a hybrid restaurant. It's counter service. It's not a full service restaurant. We do use china and silverware, but it's kept to the actual. It's not fine dining, so we're not doing 17 courses with new plates and glassware and silverware with every single bite that the guests are taking. So we try to keep the silver and glassware down to a minimum. So I think that, Dr. Duncanson is absolutely correct that we probably fall in the middle somewhere between that 20 and 35 gallons.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Nicastro has a follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm prepared to offer a motion, but I did want to ask Dr. Duncanson a follow-up question because Bob, when you talked about the measurements being the 35 gallons, which is being very conservative, I think, versus the 20, and this enterprise is a hybrid, and as the manager just said, is that comparable to? I was thinking of what else is along that stretch of road to the Cream and Cone. Are they on sewer? Is that how you would measure them? I mean, they don't have silverware at all, but people do eat inside, but they're not using water.
Yeah, Cream and Cone is on the sewer. Yeah, again, because we kind of have these hybrids in Chatham that may not be using silverware and chinaware. I've been having discussions with my staff, the health agent and the health inspector, about potentially in our local regulations having some kind of a hybrid number. We just haven't fully developed it out and discussed it with the Board of Health either. To recognize some of these ones that kind of fall in the middle between 20 and 35, maybe there's some other number that we can arrive at and use. But we do have other businesses in town that are, kind of that hybrid. As I said, we don't technically have any fast food restaurants in Chatham. They're not allowed. But we do have these other folks where, you can go in, you can get your bag of food or, a paper plate and take it outside for seating. And a lot of that, and Mr. Burgess was absolutely correct. A lot of this started during COVID, and now they're coming back in to basically formalize it going forward in the future.
Yeah, my only comment would be that it might be time for the Water and Sewer Advisory Committee, since many of these establishments are now on sewer, to take another look at whether we should codify the criteria that you articulated earlier, the Chatham-type factor. Mr. Chairman, I move that the Select Board vote to support the request by Max Seafood, 1291 Main Street, Unit 4, for an increase in sewer flow of 4,865 gallons per day, equivalent of 139 seats at 35 gallons per day per seat.
Second.
Thank you. Further discussion? Okay, Mr. Metters.
Aye.
Mr. Shell? Aye. Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Nacastro?
Aye.
And the chair says aye. Okay, thanks, Mac. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Yep,
Thank you so much.
take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, thus ends our public hearing on Max Seafood increased sewer flow request. Next item is a public announcements and agenda item requests. I believe I saw Justin Bohannon out there somewhere. I think Mr. Meadows said you might have an announcement, Mr. Bohannon?
Yes, hello. I just wanted to come on briefly and let everyone know that the form is posted on our website to suggest themes for this year's parade. So if you go to our website, which is www.chathamparade.com, you can submit a theme for this year's parade, and that will be open until February 15th. So we always get some good suggestions. Last year's theme was Chatham salty as ever.
Yeah.
So we're looking forward to another creative theme this year.
Okay, Justin, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public announcements from the public and/or from the Select Board? How about agenda item requests from the Select Board? I had one on here, okay. Elaine, your hand's up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I have an agenda item request. I think pretty much everyone has read, you guessed it, about the flooding in Commerce Park. The writer's son had gotten stuck with significant damage to his car. An employee told him that cars get stuck in that location all the time and that he should, as soon as possible, wash his legs and feet due to the puddle's stagnant water being filled with fish scales, blood, and guts, gasoline, oil, battery fluid, and other noxious material. The tow truck driver said that vehicles flood there at least once a month and sometimes as often as once a week. Commerce Park is located within our Water Resource Protection District and is where all of our public drinking wells are located. And so while it may be privately owned, I believe Chatham has jurisdiction if it is a potential threat to our water supply. I think that trumps property ownership protections. There are regulations at the municipal, state, and federal levels to mitigate an impact of stormwater and regulate impact on the public water supply. So for the health and safety of the public drinking water and individuals and perhaps families who live and work in Commerce Park and have no control despite attempts to get owners to resolve this longstanding problem, I hope that the Select Board will intercede to remedy it. I think it's good for the town and it's good for the people who live and work there and provide a lot of services to our town. Thank you very much.
Yes, Elaine, thank you. I did raise this issue, whether it was last week or the week before, and this will be an agenda item on February 7th. It's on the agenda. Okay.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, we have, it looks like Stephen Buckley. Stephen, you're on.
Okay, thank you very much. People may have noticed a story in the Cape Cod Times Sunday paper about And anyway, it had to do with towns wanting to have more of a say in planning and design of the replacement bridges over the Cape Cod Canal. And I have attended many meetings over the years. It's been many years since I've been studying this, and I'm virtually the only person from the Lower Cape that attends the meetings, or at least I was for most of that time. So anyway, I would like the town of Chatham or the select board to consider some forum or agenda item that would allow people from Mass DOT to come down and explain what's going on and what the effect on the Lower Cape or Chatham, but maybe we can do something with other towns and not, they don't have to visit all 15 towns to explain it to each one. And actually there's a webinar on tonight and Thursday if people want to find out more about it. And I suppose they can Google and find that out. So that's my request.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Stephen. Perhaps that can be done regionally rather than one by one, as you know. Okay, anybody else with a hand up? I see no one online, no one here. Okay, thus ends public announcements and agenda item requests. On to public comments on our business agenda. We have a business agenda that includes this evening bench donation, I should say, at Seaside Links, 8th Tee, one-day alcohol permits for the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy. We have a report out from the Short-Term Rentals Working Group, the recommendations and the report out. We have a review of the Department of Public Works and Water, a budget review. And we have the Nauset Beach Agreement, MOA with the town of Orleans that we've got to before the month of April or May. Anyway, and then we have a town manager's report this evening and some committee appointments as well. So any public comment on any of those business agenda items that we have going forward? I see no hands. Yes, sir. Please come up to the microphone and identify yourself.
Yeah, Noble Hanson, Chair Board of Health. I'm just here speaking for myself. And I wanted to voice support for the short-term rental registration and regulation draft that you're going to be discussing later on. And I thought I would just, to put it in perspective, I would read something from the proposed regulation in terms of purpose. The purpose of this regulation is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of occupants of short-term rental units and the public, to ensure the properties are being used in a manner that will not stress the town's water or sewer infrastructure or the property's septic infrastructure and not negatively impact the quality of life in residential neighborhoods. And just, excuse me, to go back, the select board put together a short-term rental working group, which has met a number of times. Meetings have been 2 or 3 hours. People have worked very hard. And I think initially there was a variety of opinions and feelings about whether this should or shouldn't be done. But in the end, there was a really good consensus. And you have the draft registration and regulation for you to look at tonight. During that process, the working group decided that it would be better to do it by regulation than by bylaw. And they actually asked the Board of Health how they felt about that. And we had an emergency meeting, the Board of Health, one item on the agenda, and that was to discuss what the feeling was among the board members of taking on the responsibility of doing the registration, short-term rental registration and regulation by the Board of Health. And there was a unanimous opinion that we should do it, and we voted in support of the concept of a Board of Health regulation for short-term rentals. So then it went back to the working group, and the working group worked hard. There was compromise. We had people that own rental properties. We had professionals who were rental agents, but there was, I think, a sense of compromise and trying to do something that was, good for the town and that the town needed. And finally, you have the draft, but the vote by the working group was 10-1. To me, that's pretty amazing, actually, to approve that draft and then send it on to the select board. So I would just strongly recommend that you look at that and send it back to the Board of Health to work on, as the working group suggested. Second thing is funding, and I know that gets complicated. I wrote a letter with a lot of information, but I'll just read a paragraph in that letter that has to do with funding. I feel registration alone will require significant effort. Additionally, anticipated inspections after registrations will add to the workload. The initial fee of $50 is modest, but would fund one additional position at the 1,300 STRs currently registered with the state. It is felt that the fees can self-fund the administration of the STR, another person in the health department, as the process ramps up. The short-term rental working group discussed strong feelings that these costs should come directly from STR tax funds coming back to the general funds. That was about 1.7 million, I think, last year. And less from fees paid by the STR registration fees. I understand that process is complicated. On the other hand, a fee of $100 or $150 is in line with what other towns have for their rental rules. Nantucket just passed theirs. It was $250 was their fee. Higher fees after startup would easily fund the health division administration of short-term rental registration and regulation. And my main point is that once this ramps up, I think it will be self-funding. So this is more, to me, a startup cost, this additional person, and then through fees, or if the board felt they wanted to earmark some money coming back to the state from the short-term rental taxes, it could be funded that way. In conclusion, I strongly recommend the Select Board fund an additional position to the Health Department for STR administration and inspection. The ultimate goal is self-funding the program from registration fees and/or short-term rental taxes from the state. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noble, thank you. Okay, any other comments on the business agenda, either online or in present? Okay. Next item is to consider a bench donation for the Seaside Links on the 8th tee from the Wyman family. Shauna, anything on this one?
Sure, this is the Golf Advisory Committee's ongoing work to have benches located at each tee, and we're very grateful that the Wyman family has volunteered to do one.
Yep, great, super. A motion, please. Mr. Metters.
I just had a question. Usually we get a small little backstory about their, the significance of this donation. Any little backstory associated with this?
I don't know.
A lot of feedback tonight.
I was only provided with the donation agreement from the Park and Rec Commission.
Okay, fair. It's more curiosity than anything. No, I move to accept the donation of the Wyman family of a bench to be placed on the 8th men's tee at Seaside Links Municipal Golf Course.
Second.
Okay, and a vote. Mr. Metters.
Aye.
Mr. Shell.
Aye.
Ms. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Nacastro.
Aye.
Chair says aye, resounding aye. Thank you to the Wyman family. The next item is to consider applications for special one-day alcohol permits, the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy, 235 Orleans Road on February 22nd, March 22nd, and April 26th from 6 to 8 p.m. And back at you, Shauna, any color on this one?
I believe Heather Ware from the Conservancy is
Okay.
on the call.
Heather, if you're there, you're more than welcome to speak. I see you, yep.
Yes, I am here. We are hosting our Shark Tales lecture series on those 3 dates that are listed there. This is a series that we ran last winter as well. It was a great success for us. We bring in lecturers from all over New England. People purchase tickets for this event, and with the price of the ticket comes the one free, paid for drink via the price of the ticket. And we do check IDs at the door and do the wristbands.
I think it's great you're offering, this during the doldrums, February,
Yes.
March,
The
April,
idea.
so I think it's great. Okay. Any questions? Ms. Davis?
No questions. I was
Okay.
just going to make a motion.
Yep.
I move to grant special one-day alcohol permits for wine and malt beverages only to Heather Ware on behalf of the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy for Wednesday, February 22nd, 2023 from 6 to 8 p.m., Wednesday, March 22nd, 2023 from 6 to 8 p.m., and Wednesday, April 26, 2023 from 6 to 8 p.m. at 255 Orleans Road, North Chatham.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Shell. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Mr. Nacastro?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Shell?
Aye.
Mr. Metters?
Aye.
And the chair says aye as well. Thank you very much. Sounds like fun. Next item on the agenda is a discussion of the short-term rentals working group recommendations and a report and a 2024 staffing request. We heard a summary by Mr. Noble Hanson earlier during public comments, and I know Health Agent Judith Giorgio is here to give us some background and a summary. I see you online. Hi, Judith. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, Chairman Dykens. So Noble kind of went over some of this, but in your meeting in October, you tasked myself and town manager and to form a short-term rental working group. And the purpose was to review a draft bylaw that the Board of Health had put together. And then also the scope of the discussion was to develop a strategy to respond to the community concerns about the growth of this industry in Chatham. We've had, as you heard, we had several meetings and a lot of good discussion. And when it came down to it, the group felt that instead of doing a bylaw, that we should focus on a Board of Health regulation that would be easier to pass and make changes to, more so to make changes to, should we get into it and find that we want to make changes, and the Board of Health could do that easily without having to change a town bylaw. So we worked on a regulation, a very stripped down regulation, and a registration process. And it was a 10-to-1 vote with one abstaining on the regulation that we prepared, and I think you have that in your packet. The purpose of the proposed regulation is to protect the public health, safety, and welfare of the general public and occupants of short-term rentals. We feel we would accomplish this through through the registration, ensuring compliance with basic life safety and sanitary codes. And we also felt it very important to be able to collect data moving forward. There was some concern that we didn't really have enough data on the subject, but really the only way to collect the data is to have some type of a registration scheme. So that's what we felt would be the best way to move forward. And also, we supported a modest registration fee of $50 to cover administration costs of the program. In addition to the regulation and registration, we also came up with some recommendations that a database be created to allow all departments, police, community development, fire, et cetera, to collect data on complaints or concerns received from the community, so that we will be able to look back and see how we're going and what may need to be changed moving forward. We also, I feel, and I think IT would feel, that we do already have software that we can use for that purpose. We also felt that there should be an effective communication and marketing strategy to help inform people about the program, and also to gain public support on it. And the last thing on conditions was to keep talking about the topic, looking at concerns not covered by our group, such as zoning and long-term rentals and housing issues. So what the registration, just to speak a little bit more about that, or the regulation, would be, what we envision is the Board of Health passed it, would go into effect July 1st, requiring that the short-term registration begin by March 1st, 2024, and the registration period, or the registration certificates for the first year would be from March 1st, 2024 through April 30th, 2025. So that's basically the program we proposed. As far as fiscal impacts, we feel that we would be able to cover this with the registration fee for at least one person. The committee did not actually discuss or didn't feel supportive totally of or making a recommendation on staffing at that time. But I also wanted to say that this wouldn't cover lodging houses or bed and breakfasts or cottages. Those are covered on another regulation that we already, actually a mass general law that we already do all this type of work for. We inspect and we register them. I think that's all I have. I'd love to take some questions.
Super, thank you, Judith. That was a great summary, and Mr. Metters and I did attend the meetings, and thought the group worked very well together. They were a lot of common sense, a lot of compromise, and a lot of thought. I thought the notion of having a regulation and not a bylaw was a great start to kind of dealing with kind of the tools that the Board of Health needs to, in case there are complaints, and so you have some teeth in a regulation. So anyway, I thought the group worked very well. I'll echo what Noble said and what you said as well. Questions from the Select Board? Mr. Nacastro has his hand up, and
Did you want to hear from your
yeah, Mr. Metters, you're
But I
more
do
than
have
welcome to
some
jump in.
questions and comments.
No, I'll make some general comments. I think the group worked in good faith with each other. There was, obviously a variety of opinions and background and knowledge that was put into the input. Even the minority vote on the final recommendation, I think at least myself and I think several other members shared in the concerns that were brought up. They were reasonable. Ultimately, we did vote in favor of, of approving this and sending it to the Select Board. The $50 registration fee compromise, I think it was a offering for a funding source for a staff member. We went back and forth. I think there's some argument of whether the money taken in by short-term rental could itself kind of handle this program, but we thought it'd be reasonable to put a $50 fee out there for consideration to basically justify funding a new staff member. There's a review period for this in 3 years to kind of see is this problem, to what level there is, and in that time we're going to collect data to basically verify that we're taking the right action, or should we ease off on some of this, or should we beef up certain things. So the data collection over the next couple of years is going to be vital to the success of this regulation. Also recognizing that there's other elements outside the regulation that are going to have to be looked at some level by some other parties, possibly zoning, but this is not a one fix for everything. This is a piece of the puzzle. Those who have situations where maybe there's a celebration every week and big tents and whatever, this is not going to address it. This is a different mechanism, but it's a step forward. Later on when we get into the language, there are a couple, some minor things that I still want to point out that I have some concerns over, but in general, I think the group worked very well. We put a good faith forward project presentation, toward this board for consideration, and it was very enjoyable working with the group and getting the variety of input and opinions out there. And our meetings were 2 hours long on average. Sometimes the last one we went to 3 almost. So it was definitely well attended, and I appreciate all the members who put their time in for the group. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Corey. Mr. Nacastro, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to commend the working group for coming up with this. I want to commend the chair of our board and Mr. Metters and the town manager for openness to including on the board a diversity of opinions and backgrounds. I think that was really important. I was concerned about it going in, but I think in the end you appointed a good group of people. I want to acknowledge also the input we received just within the last 24 hours from Luther Bates, which I think all of us read, even though it came in, I think, at 2:30 in the morning. But I was actually up at 2:30, and I read it at 2:30. And Luther, it didn't help me get back to sleep. So, and Ms. Aikman sent a letter today. Luther was opposed to this, and Ms. Aikman is in favor of it. I did have a question for Judy relative to the fee, or Dr. Duncanson perhaps. The Board of Health under Chapter 83 can make regulations, and those regulations have to be made following publication notice. Does that include the authority to level a fee?
Yes, it does. And of course, we would have public hearings on this as well before we can enact a regulation. So we do have the right to charge a fee that would cover the cost of administrating the program.
That doesn't have to come before the select board or town meeting?
No.
Okay. I am very pleased with what you came up with. I was expecting something, frankly, a lot less definitive and perhaps limited purely to registration. So I'm very supportive of it. I support the additional staff person. I would support increasing the fee to $100, but I'll leave that to the Board of Health. I did want to ask a question about the penalty for, on the enforcement provision, which is on page 3, that's a reference to the Code of Administrative Legislation. Is that a state document, or is that a town document?
That refers to Mass
That is
General
state.
Law. Yes, that allows us to ticket and fine
Okay.
violations.
And
But
go ahead, Judy.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that we have this in all of our regulations, and it's not used a lot. We try to work with people and educate them before we write tickets, and I explain that to the working group as well. We see these things as, giving people a chance to remedy the situation before we start sending out tickets and having enforcement hearings and such.
There is, thank you, on paragraph A, which is registration on page 1, going over to page 2, there is a notation in the margin that the regulation, a draft, exempts owners who rent for 14 days or less in a calendar year. Was there some discussion about that back and forth, whether to include them or not? Is that something the Board of Health would consider when they take this forward?
That was, well, I was
You go,
just
Bob.
going to say, that was the comment that's in the margin was my comment. When this draft came over from the short-term rental group and I reviewed it, to me, the distinction of the 14 days or less was in conflict with state law, so I just wanted to point that out for you and for the Board of Health when it gets to them, because I didn't want to unilaterally change what the short-term rental group had proposed, but I wanted to make sure that people were aware that that was counter to what the state regulation currently says, and potentially to offer a workaround to that by including short-term rentals that are less than 14 days, but maybe waiving the fee for them.
Okay.
So that was my comment, but I just wanted it to be there so people understood that that's something maybe the Board of Health needs to discuss and potentially revise when it gets to them.
Was the regulation draft run by town council, or would the Board of Health be running it by town council before you adopt it?
It has not been given to town council yet. I honestly wanted to see what happened tonight, and then potentially at the first Board of Health meeting, either before the first Board of Health meeting or after that, we will have it reviewed by town council, but it has not been done so yet.
Okay, and then I would just offer 2 or 3 edits. I think they're just typos, really. On page 1, under the definition of owner, it says any person whom alone. I think it just should be who. Drop the M.
Yeah.
On page 2, at the bottom, paragraph B, in the second line, and telephone number of the president, I would suggest you also insert the term manager, because that's the term of the party that generally operates an LLC.
So would you delete legal representative, Dean?
No, I would leave that in.
Okay.
I would say president, comma, manager,
Okay.
and legal representative of the corporation. Or you could say president or manager. It could be either one, and the legal representative. I think the intent there is to get the operations person and the council listed. Is that what your plan is? Yeah. I just wanted,
Yes.
I just throwing out that LLCs generally have a manager, not rather than a president. In paragraph A, and I'm just noticing this on the second line, right at the end, person should be pluralized with an S.
Yep.
And,
Okay, thank you.
and I think that the only other, on the affidavit, the draft affidavit,
Yep.
at the very bottom where it has title, you could put manager as well. And it says president, managing partner, et cetera.
Okay.
But again, I think this is a good document, and I think it's very helpful to the town to have this. I have great confidence in our Board of Health and in the statutory process for adopting regulations. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Nacastro. Ms. Davis?
Thanks, Jeff. I have a question for Judy or Dr. Bob, and then for you, Jeff, or Corey. Judy, you mentioned that we have an inspection and regulation of cottages. What is different, or are they the same? This regulation that we're going to put before short-term rentals, is it the same as the cottage regulations?
The cottages, it's not really regulation, it's mass general law that they be licensed by the local boards of health. And we go in every year with a team, usually fire and building department, and inspect them for fire safety and sanitation. So that's part of mass general law, that cottages, hotels, motels, boarding houses, those types of things be licensed through the local board of health.
And was that considered into the short-term rental?
They are exempt from this.
The short-term rental will be exempt from inspection?
No, the cottages and hotel motels are exempt from this regulation.
Okay, all right. I guess my question, because we both brought it, I think Corey brought it up, but for whoever, you mentioned that there specifically were some concerns in discussions around the regulations. What were those concerns? Can you recall?
One was that, we don't have a regulation on long-term rentals, so, I mean, I think it's fair. I think this is a step, I think, and then we can talk about long-term rentals as well. There were issues about parking and anomalies when you have a large group or a wedding and blah, blah, blah. And the data gathering, what was important for data, is it really water utilization? Is it septic usage? What are we really trying to regulate, if you will? The sentiment, I thought the consensus sentiment for the working group was no one was really out to kill the short-term rental business, if you will, in Chatham, but to address those most onerous circumstances. So give the Board of Health a regulation that they can enforce should there be onerous happenings out there in the short-term rental land. That's what that was the sentiment, I thought, the consensus of the group. And to Corey's comments and Noble's and Judith's, it really was and Mr. Nicastro's, it really was a good working group. It's a good example of Jill putting together and us putting together a group that kind of represented a broad spectrum of the community, not just, it was everybody.
So the 3-year review, how is that decided upon? 3, not 2? Or?
Yeah, I think that, I don't know, I don't recommend.
Give it a little bit of time to kind of
Time to
collect data.
percolate.
Yeah.
All right.
It's kind of an arbitrary number, but 3 was just kind of a nice sounding number at the time.
I mean, the one thing, Shereen, is, how many complaints have we really had?
Yeah.
And what are the nature of the complaints? So, it's to keep a log of complaints and how many times the Board of Health needs to interject their presence and/or regulation, blah, blah, blah. So we just want to gather some data as well.
Okay.
Because, we just want to gather a log going forward of how many issues there are and aren't. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Mr. Shell, yes.
Yeah. Let me just start with a procedural point. It was brought to my attention indirectly that there was a perception in the public that I had a conflict because my wife and I own a house which we rent some years 3 years, 3 weeks, some years 4 or 5, maybe 6 at the most. I consulted with town council and decided to file one of these disclosure of potential conflict forms, which is on file with the town clerk now, and anybody who's interested is welcome to go take a look at that. It's a public document. And by the way, I did not believe that I have any conflict, so I just want to get that kind of to one side. Let me start by saying I have no problem with gathering data through a registration process. I do understand that short-term rentals have a major impact, positive and negative, on Chatham. I don't know how much, and what I can tell you is that if you just take the $1.7 million of short-term rental tax income that we got for fiscal '22 at the rate of, I guess it's 4%, that implies something on the order of $45 million of rental income that's coming into Chatham for that period. So it's a significant economic factor for the town. I had reservations about a bylaw when we commissioned the formation of the working group, but that process has the let's call it protections, the democratic protections of input from the community and a sort of a wide variety of thinking and information and individual commentary on the potential impact of whatever is adopted. I have serious reservations about commending this to the Board of Health. I have tremendous confidence in the Board of Health, and I don't mean to imply any reservation in that regard, but when you look at the things that have been articulated as the targets for concern, they're things that the fire department, the police department, the planning board, and indeed, by the way, if anybody who listened, there was probably at least a half an hour devoted to the subject of short-term rentals at last night's planning board meeting. Clearly, it's a big issue for Chatham, but I think we're rushing to judgment here, and I would suggest that I would be much more comfortable with framing up some sort of a process for figuring out a registration process, no problem. Dedicating a person to do that. And my understanding is, for example, that it took Provincetown 4 years to get their registration to where they thought they really had accurate information. And that's something I could be very comfortable with and be very supportive of. But layering onto that regulation that is putting restrictions on the rentals themselves, without adequate data, which is what it appears to me is the case, I think is not the right course of action. I point out, for example, this regulation, if you read it, I read it 3 or 4 times, it appears to me that it applies to rentals this summer. Now, I know that's not the intent, that's not the way it was described, and that's something that can easily be fixed if that's the idea as a drafting matter, but it's exemplary of the kind of things that can happen when you move too quickly and you're in a hurry to do something that needs a little more reflection. So as I say, I have serious reservations about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shell. Mr. Metters.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. No, so from my perspective on this is you have a lot of property owners who have been renting and they're filing with their taxes and collecting all the fees that are paid, and they care about their property. So this is not going to be a heavy lift for most people that are running a clean, straightforward business. They care about their property. They don't want to have it abused. I think we are more focused on the entities that are really going to push the envelope and are trying to, put twice the probably reasonable occupancy in a house are less concerned about the wear and tear on the property, are less concerned about how it impacts the neighbors. I think that is something that has driven some of this concern, some of the conversations. And I think whichever way you feel about this regulation, I think the 3-year review period is going to be very vital, because we're going to collect some data and get some actual hard numbers, hard feedback, hard specific examples of what has been happening, to get a better understanding of where this is going. But I don't think this is going to be a heavy lift on anyone who's been doing what they've been doing, because in the proper way. The one area which I had brought up during the working session, I still think needs to be reviewed by town council. It's not the end-all be-all, but I do think there's going to be an expectation of what is going to be able to be enforced and not enforced. Because we do have, under page 3 in the parking scenario, we reference public and private roads. I have a different opinion than maybe some of my colleagues about what is enforceable and not enforceable on a private road. So I would like to have that reviewed and commented on, so that whatever draft is put out there, there's an expectation, a clear expectation of what we can and cannot enforce. So I just question our ability on private roads of what we can and can't do. So, but that will all be reviewed and put out for the public hearing by the Board of Health and our town council. But I think generally this is a good draft. I'm not going to say I'm 100% behind it, but I think in good faith this is something we should try to do. Do the 3-year review and move forward from there.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Metters. Dr. Bob, your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on Mr. Metter's last comment regarding the parking. The language in there and the distinction between private and public roads, that is based on information from our police chief, that there are certain things that they can enforce on public roads, and there are other things that they can enforce on both public and private. And that's why it's broken out between the two there. But, it will, as I said, it will definitely be reviewed by town council.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. Ms. Davis, and then I've got...
I just have a question about the effective date. It says July 1st, 2023. I know a few realtors in town and that do short-term rentals. And I mean, it seems like a lot of rentals are booked already for the season. And how would this effective date impact already existing, agreements that the companies or individuals have? So maybe a date shouldn't be July 1st, 2023, but be a more ended specific date later in the year, just because you're already in the season of rental with rental agreements that have already happened.
Yeah. Thoughts? Judith? Go ahead, Judith.
I just want to clarify that the regulation actually says that people do not need to be registered until March 1st, 2024. And the registration period then would be for 1 year from March 2024 to April 30th. So we took into account, we totally understand that this summer is mostly booked up. It would give people until the following March to get their dwellings in order if they need to make any changes or need to have any more information from the Board of Health, from us regarding septic and all of that. So it really, even though we say effective July 1st, but the registration is not due until March 1st, 2024.
Thank you.
Mr. Shell.
I don't want to get into a debate with you, just have council look at it. I appreciate what you say about the registration, but there's a flat prohibition on a short-term rental as of the effective date. And I think if you look at it, you'll see that you don't get an exemption because you don't have to be registered until some later date. And I'll leave it at that. It's not worth our debating that point here, but I think it's not as simple as just when the registrations have to be effective.
Go ahead.
As long as I have the floor, I'll just say one other thing, and somewhat addressing your point, Corey. Another of my concerns, and again, I want to stay big picture with this. I'm in agreement in principle. I think we're rushing this. But we've seen in the summertime that with respect to irrigation enforcement, the people who comply, they're not a problem, okay? But we have all kinds of people who are not complying, and everybody can see that they're not complying. And it's not so much that we don't want to enforce or we don't want to administer it properly, it's that it is a strain on the staff. And when you're talking about 1,300, and some people say it's not 1,300, it's maybe 2,000, whatever the number is, it's a large number of homes that are subject potentially to this regulation. And I think it's particularly important that there be an appearance of even-handed, I'll call it administration, enforcement, call it what you want. It's not clear to me, by the way, whether we're talking about one clerk or two, $63,000 or $126,000. But what is clear to me is that the process of just getting that registration organization together is going to be a big job. And if you add to that some notion of enforcement, it's a much bigger job. And I appreciate that, you know, people feel that, well, it's only 8 or 10, we've only had 9 complaints in the last X years. To me, that raises a question, why are we doing this in such a rush? So that's my thought.
Well, just to respond, Mike, just briefly, the Board of Health approached us, so they feel as though they need this as an arrow in the quill, if you will, should it be needed. So I think the regulation approach versus a bylaw approach is more of a minimalist approach rather than, a kind of a deep bylaw. So I'm willing to support it. The Board of Health asked for it, they feel they need it. And I think the group came up with regulations that I think potentially address those most onerous concerns so the Board of Health actually has some teeth to deal with outliers, if you will. Again, I think the regulation isn't so rushed. I think it's actually pretty well thought out. Mr. Nicastro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think all the comments that have been made from board members are very thoughtful and insightful and identify potential issues and concerns, as well as the benefits that would flow from such a regulation. But as I said earlier, this would go to this Board of Health. They would have a public hearing process, and there would be an opportunity to amend it accordingly if they felt it should be. There are, as Mrs. Aikman pointed out to us in an email, there are 8 other Cape communities that have adopted a short-term rental bylaw, so we wouldn't be an outlier on it. In any event, recognizing that this may not get unanimous vote from the board, I nonetheless would offer the following motion: that the board support Board of Health moving forward with the adoption of the regulation, and that the board support the staffing proposal for, was it one, I know Mike said one full position, Jill, that would be in the budget for FY '24. That's the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Nicastro. Would you entertain the notion of adding to that regulation guaranteeing that, town council has given it review and guaranteeing a public hearing as well?
Yes, I would add that to the motion, that the Board of Health hold a public hearing.
Yep.
As well as
review by
consult with town council for review of the regulation before adopting it.
Okay. I'll second. Further discussion? Okay, Mr. Metters,
Aye.
Mr. Shell,
No.
Ms. Davis,
Aye.
Mr. Nacastro,
Aye.
and the chair says aye as well. Thank you very much to the working group. I really appreciate the time and effort folks put into the working group and off to the Board of Health. Thank you very much for your efforts. Okay. Next item on our board agenda is our budget review of Department of Public Works and Water, fiscal year '24. Alex, you've been very patient, Alex. Good evening. Off to you.
Good evening, thank you. Yes, tonight we're reviewing the Department of Public Works for the FY 2024 budget. We'll be discussing some of the proposed staffing for this department, as well as the different divisions. What I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to share the budget book, the online budget book, so we can run through this. You were given, and I apologize for the lateness of the agenda report, which was communicated today to you. So basically, the Department of Public Works is one of the larger departments in the town, and it is presented at $8,072,000 for FY 2024, and that's an increase of just over 14% over FY 2023. So this does not include the water department because that's a separate division funded by water rates. So also looking at this is going forward, we have recreation and beaches included, but we've segregated those out for the future in FY 2024, as those are now under community services. So let me just see if I can share my screen right now, and we'll get the budget book up. And can you see the budget book now?
No, not yet.
Oh, yeah.
Not yet. All right, hold on a second. Share.
There you go. It's good.
There we go. Okay, thank you. All right, so again, we have and I love this, the budget book online. So we are looking at the different departments under the Department of Public Works. So we have highway, snow and ice, street lights, transfer station, the fuel depot, the cemetery grounds, and street lighting. We'll start with the highway division. And I'm going to increase the font here so you can see it a little bit better. Is that better? No. Yes, no?
Pretty small.
It's better, but not good enough.
Very small. Okay. How's that?
Better.
All right. Better. Okay. And again, this is in your budget book, but for the public at home, I want to show this online. So for FY 2024, under the highway division, we're proposing 2 additional full-time equivalents, so 8 full-time and 2 seasonal. And the additions under the highway department are for an equipment mechanic, mechanic or equipment operator, and then a second position for a DPW secretary who would handle all the divisions. As you might be aware, we have 2 staff, full-time staff, who are funded mainly through the water division, the water department. So this would handle all the other divisions under DPW. Coming down and looking at the increases. Most of this division, and this is not a good visual, is for personnel under the highway. And we're looking at, again, an increase of 23.1% for regular wages. And again, that is due to the new secretarial position as well as the mechanic. Other items that have increased are the continuing education for the licenses for our highway personnel, and then for advertising for the snow and ice, the private road list, which needs to be funded under highway because it is not allowed to be deficit spent per Mass General Law. So street signs, we've also increased that line item by 33%, or increase of $2,000, as it's become more expensive to do it in-house, although it allows us to react quicker. So I will move on unless there's any questions on the Highway Division.
Questions? Anybody? Okay. Continue, Alex, please. Yep.
Snow and ice is level funded, so I really won't talk about that. I don't think there's any questions on that. That's something that we are allowed to deficit spend as long as we fund the same level that we did in the previous year. And it's only for the direct removal of snow and ice for public safety. Street lighting is increasing, and again, this is due to the expected increase in electricity costs. So again, we've budgeted $22,500, but it's still well below where we were back in 2014 when we switched to the LED lights. Transfer station, we are requesting additional staff here. We're requesting additional gate guards. So we're moving from 6 full-time and 2 seasonal to 7 full-time and 1 seasonal. We've had a lot of difficulty trying to staff the seasonal positions, especially the gate guard. So that's why we're requesting a second gate guard who would provide relief for, the 2 gate guards would supplement each other. They can provide additional support for recycling, as well as fill in when there's vacancies in that position, and not have the senior equipment operators having to cover the gate guard duties. This budget, you can see where expenditures are actually higher than the personnel expenses, and that's due to a lot of the contracts for the recycling removal and the CMAS contract for our municipal solid waste. And again, going through the budget book, we can look here where we have one of our operators is afloat between highway and transfer station, although spends most of his time at the transfer station, which is one of the reasons why we didn't recommend the second equipment operator for FY 2024. We've reduced the temporary wages because if we have the new gate guard, we can eliminate the seasonal gate guard position. And then moving through again, we have the CMAS tipping. The contract will expire in December 2024 for FY 2025, so we'll look at that in the future, but that is an 8% increase. And the trucking costs have also gone up. And
Is that increased by contract, Alex?
that's based on our expected, the CMAS tipping is, but for the trucking, we expect it to go up based on actuals.
Okay, thanks.
Recyclables.
I have one more question, Alex. In years past, we've kind of netted revenues against expenses here in the transfer station. Even I can remember, I can harken back a decade ago or whatever. It was our revenue center. We actually made money at the dump, between stickers and all in. How do we do? How do we do?
The transfer station brings in quite a bit of money. I'm just looking to see if I have that with me. I believe it's over $1 million.
Yeah.
However, I don't think it comes to the level of 1.7. I think it's close. So we are almost breaking even.
Yeah, that's not assuming any major reinvestment in plant and material, plant and equipment, et cetera. But anyway, it's not as expensive as one might think. We make a few bucks here. I mean, we generate revenues as well. That's my point.
It breaks even, almost breaks even. Again, if you include benefits, it probably doesn't break even, but it's close.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, fuel depot, again, we're raising due to expected increases in the cost of fuel. Again, we want to make sure we have enough money there, not having to transfer money in, as you can see from this red item, where we had to cover through year-end transfers, which is allowed under Mass General Law.
Yeah.
I'm going to move on to sewer. I'm going to not discuss project administration and facilities tonight, but just focus on DPW while we have our interim director, Bob Rooney, in the audience, who can answer any technical questions where I'm trying to deal with the more numbers. Sewer, again, level funded. This is mostly contracted out. So there's not it's a salary line item is just a portion of the DPW's director's salary. And most of it is the expenditures, and this is contracted services for our operations. So again, we have an increase here for the testing as testing goes up, and the electricity for the wastewater treatment facility, as well as 4 new pump stations. So we've segregated these out, but the 4 new pump stations definitely add a lot for the electricity. Gas heat, we're expecting gas prices to go up. Plant maintenance, based on actual, the plant is getting older. We keep on thinking of it as being a new plant, but it is definitely been around for 10 years now, so we need to make sure that we take care of our infrastructure. We're leaving solid waste, the sludge disposal at level funded. And then this is where our contracted services going up by 7%, and Weston and Sampson are in their final year of their contract, so we'll be looking to go out to bid for a new contract operations for both water and sewer towards the end of this year. And yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Yep. Thank you. Didn't know
So
that.
again, you can see notes here when we're moving postage from water into sewer, because again, a lot of those are duplicates. So we moved some of that into the sewer department. And moving down, the bottom line is it's an 8.2% increase overall for the sewer department, or division, sorry. So I'll take a break here if there's any questions. Okay. I'm going to skip water right now. I'll go to cemetery and come back to water, as that is, as I said, funded separately.
Yep.
Through the water rates. And in the water, in the cemetery division, we are looking to increase the part-time cemetery administrator to a full-time cemetery administrative assistant, I would say. And again, this is to, we'll have to look at the job description and move into that as we move through the budget. So we have, moving the, again, the wages here seem to go down as we've moved the principal projects administrative assistant fully into that budget and out of 50% out of the cemetery budget. So that's why it's gone down, although we are looking to increase this to full-time. And basically, everything else in this budget remains unchanged. So again, it's just the addition of, well, the increase from a part-time 19-hour-a-week to a full-time position. Yeah. And questions on cemetery? Okay. Moving through now to water. Funded by water rates. This is level, same amount of staffing, so 2 full-time administrative positions. The DPW director is funded at 45% of that person's salary, and the assistant DPW superintendent is 50% of their salary is funded through the water division. And moving down, you can see here, again, it's mostly expenditures rather than personnel, as it is contract expenses. And to get into the spreadsheet. So again, we have a, originally there was new staff proposed under the water division, and this has been moved back, as I said before, into the general fund, into DPW to assist all DPW divisions, as we do have 2 administrative staff currently funded under the water department.
Alex, where's the PFAS testing booked? The monitoring, the testing?
Testing is underwater.
Yep.
So I'll move down from that. I think we did increase contracted services. It's going up for the contract. We have down, so chemicals are going up.
Yeah.
Capital outlay, we can use that for testing. Groundwater monitoring, that can be used for testing as well. So, okay. And we do have a separate capital article that we voted last year for testing for PFAS.
Okay. Thanks.
So this budget is only going up about 1.7% over the prior year. And again, most of that is due to the increase in chemicals and the contracted services. But, and we need to talk about PFAS testing moving on because there's a lot to talk about that moving forward. So let me just go into capital. I'm sorry.
Mr. Nacastro.
Alex, can I ask a question about the cemetery, not per se, but comparatively, and not taking nothing away from the current members of the board? There's a stipend that they get. Is that the only, I think this was an issue or a question that came up long before I ever came on the board. Is that the only board that's paid a stipend? Or the assessors get a stipend?
No, the assessors, the Board of Assessors and the cemetery commissioners, the airport commission, and the select board.
Is the stipend for the non-select board committees, is that the same as the cemetery commission? Do you recall? I don't need an answer at the present time. I just was curious.
I can't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to look in my budget book. I think it's noted in the budget book.
Well, thank you. And I do support the full-time position in the cemetery department as the commission has requested, so.
Yes, as you recall, the commission did request that, and there's a lot of administrative work that needs to be done as well as meeting with families. And I think we need to look at the job description and then put that out for a posting moving forward. So I'll take a break here if there's any other questions right now before I move into some of the capital items for the DPW division.
I think we're good, Alex.
All right, I'm going to share my screen again and move on to the capital. So moving down through the DPW. And we have under highway a total of $555,000 requested for highway. Many of these are annual items that you see, except for the first item here, which is a one-ton truck with the plow and sander for $140,000, and that replaces a 13-year-old truck. So the cost of vehicles has been increasing, and with the plow and sanding equipment on it, it is about $140,000 based on prior year actuals that we've looked at. The annual road maintenance, these are for the annual article, $20,000, which is normally what we've funded in the past. Bike trail maintenance, we like to keep the bike trail maintenance up, so $5,000 has been recommended. Catch basins, again, these are annual items that we've been funding at these levels for many years. Road resurfacing, $200,000, and then sidewalk construction for $150,000, as we still have a fairly healthy balance under the sidewalk construction. So I'll take a pause there if there's any questions on the highway division's capital.
Questions from the board? I think we're good.
Okay. Moving on down to the sewer department. And again, these are the items that are in the capital budget article. These are not the standalone articles, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. The original sewer collection system repairs, we've been funding that for $100,000. We just started doing that a couple of years ago, and it's prudent to fund that as we need to move through making sure that the original sewer system has funds to be repaired. And then we have the rehab of the influent building at Lakeside for $220,000, and that replaces the combination screening and grit removal unit for treating the wastewater. So that's a total of $320,000. And again, this is in the capital budget article.
It's in the 3.7. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is that? What is that
Yeah, I don't
building?
know.
Where is that building?
On Lakeside, I'm not sure if Dr. Bob is still on here.
He is, yeah.
But I believe it's, yeah.
I am.
Can you give us a
Thank
little
you. Bob,
background
will you
on
speak
that?
to that?
Transfer station.
Yeah, it's not a lakeside building. The lakeside is actually the manufacturer of the unit. And it basically is where the raw sewage comes into the wastewater treatment plant, and it goes through this prefabricated unit made by Lakeside. And it basically takes all the non-liquid material, if you will, all the ping pong balls and the tennis balls and all the other stuff that people put down their toilets that they shouldn't have. It removes any grit and all that gets into the system. You know, even though we think of the system as tight, sand and all can still get into the system. Obviously, when you take a shower in the summer, or even from sanding roads in the wintertime, you can get grit and sand into the system. And this unit basically removes all that kind of trashy type material out of the waste flow.
This is the first tier at the facility.
Yes,
I remember touring it
yes,
with
it's
you a few
basically-
years ago.
Yeah, as soon as the wastewater comes
Okay.
into the influent building, this is the first unit that it goes through.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Alex, there was a question earlier about the ADA funding, and I think you just scrolled through the principal projects capital request. Can you just confirm, is it $250,000 for FY '24, or is it $50,000 a year for 5
It
years?
is $250,000 per year
Whoa.
for $1 million. Yeah,
thank
there's a whole report was, and we can provide that to the select board.
Is that going to be sufficient is that $1 million going to be sufficient to address the essential recommendations from the committee that we heard, I think, last year?
There was a consultant, I think.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, that was based on their recommendations, and Terry Whalen, spoke to them and said, it's going to be difficult to do it all in 1 year.
Yeah.
Can we put it out over 5 years? So that's been programmed into the 5-year capital plan.
okay, thanks.
Great.
I'm going to share my screen again.
Sure.
Okay, again, yeah, so here, as a matter of fact, here's the municipal buildings requests for the ADA improvements, all buildings. We have 250,000 over each year over a 5-year period.
Okay.
So I'll move down to Parks and Grounds is requesting to replace a large mowing machine as well as utility trailer. And Cemetery is requesting the annual cleaning of headstones in town cemeteries for $10,000. And again, the fence repair and vegetation removal, kind of an ongoing project. And important to note that we can fund this through some of the available funds from the cemetery department. Solid Waste Sewer is looking for $20,000 for the cubic yard roll-off replacements. And I think that's it for the DPW on the 5-year capital budget.
Okay.
So are
Mr.
there any
DeCastro, go
questions
ahead.
on?
Yes. Dean has-
Alex, is there anything relative to the library this year? I know that there's an issue, serious issue with the HVAC system that's being looked at by the town manager and consultants and so forth, and the library trustees. But the master plan, the master site plan, sometimes called the landscaping plan, which has some accessibility improvements, is that fully funded from town meeting votes that we've already taken?
Yes, that has been, as you might recall, we repurposed some of that money and then we replenished it when we had the building issues. So those have been fully funded. We do have on the scorecard, we're looking at the library HVAC. We did have a placeholder for $1 million at one time, but I think that it's come in well above that, or we're looking at that. So when Terry Whalen comes before you, I think we want to get those firm numbers down before we bring it before the board, but we will be looking for a combination of funding, whether it's from free cash, borrowing, or the tax levy, of up to perhaps $2 million as a standalone article for the HVAC at the library. So that's one of those standalone articles that we'd be talking about.
It's a super sophisticated heat pump system from what I understand, so.
It better be for 2 million.
But that's not in the budget book yet, right? The placeholder is not in the budget book per se, or is it?
Right.
Okay.
Right. No, that's not in the budget book. That's a separate article, and I'll run through some of those right now.
Okay.
As we're talking about some of these.
Thank you.
We've talked about the transfer station and some of the improvements that needs to be done at the transfer station. So again, whether this is phased in or we approve a whole amount and then we can phase it in so we don't have to borrow all at once. Because again, this is also going to be almost a $2 million project to get that moving forward. As you recall, there was safety improvements, there was improvements in the recycling area, and also I think the flow. So be presenting that coming forward. And I know, as I said, I think the recommendation will be probably to phase that in for some of the more pressing needs first. We did approve $470,000 a few years ago, which we can probably get those initial needs done first, but we'll need to have additional appropriation to complete that project. One of the other items that we're looking for, and I know you've all heard about it, is the belt filter press. Whether we move forward this year or whether that can be put off is something up for discussion. We had programmed in $4.5 million a couple of years ago. We're now projecting it's going to be almost $4.9 million to replace that. And I see Bob Duncanson has his hand up.
Dr. Bob.
Well, I was just going to comment that one thing to keep in mind if you're talking about delaying that project, it has been funded under the Clean Water SRF intended use plan for this year. So in order to stay with SRF funding, we would need our local appropriation by June 30th. So just something to keep in mind. If not, we'd have to reapply again to SRF again come August.
And that's important to note because those are those 0% interest loans through SRF. So that would save the town any borrowing costs if we weren't able to fund it, if we had to fund it through borrowing, which for almost $5 million is probably the way to go.
So I think we're going to have a capital meeting going forward, and we're going to grapple with this issue when we have that capital meeting, because I think that's an excellent point, and we'd be foolish not to take advantage of 0% financing. If, in fact, we're not guaranteed getting it going forward, I think we need to discuss the issue. Mr. Nicastro.
Just along those lines, going back to the library HVAC, my understanding, Bob Bruni's here as well. He was present at the meeting with the library trustees. There may be some funding for that under the Deficit Reduction Act. I want to say the so-called Deficit Reduction Act, but that might be a political comment.
That's okay.
The Deficit Reduction Act, there might be some funding for that. Is that some grant monies that we could get from the federal government from some manner, in some manner or form? Is that correct, Alex?
Yeah, we always, I'm not sure, I'd have to see if that would qualify, but we would definitely look for any grant funds that are available for any of these projects. As Dr. Bob just mentioned, any 0% funding that's available for the library, whether there's any library grants. I'm not sure if that would go for the building, but we could look at that, and or whether any ARPA funds might be available for that as well.
Yeah, I think Terry did say that there might be some funding available, and we should keep that in mind when we have that session.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Okay, Alex.
Yeah, so again, we're looking at, the water control pollution facility for electronic upgrades for $400,000. We are looking at some of the funding sources, whether or not the Harwich IMA funds go into a wastewater capital stabilization fund might be an appropriate way to fund some of these smaller $400,000 items. So we'll look at that. And that's, I think, what I have right now for the DPW, water capital. How could I forget? Water capital.
Water capital.
We have two small items for water capital that we're looking at, $500,000 to fund the continuing, and I know it's not small, but the continuing replacement program for the water mains. We've been funding that anywhere from $500,000 to $750,000 per year. Looking at the available funds in the water department, we're recommending $500,000. And then we're also recommending $50,000 for the South Chatham iron and manganese study to see, what would be needed down there in South Chatham if we were to get any of those wells up, whether a treatment plant is needed.
Is this 10 and 11?
South Chatham wells. I don't believe.
Those would be new wells.
Which ones?
Those would be new wells, yeah.
1, 2, and 3?
South Chatham is current wells 1, 2, and 3.
Okay,
Right.
thanks.
Thank you.
What are we doing about new wells, though? I mean, when I brought up that question a week or so ago, somebody said, we've got $50,000 for South Chatham. I'm talking about wells,
Beyond 10 and 11.
12 and 13,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
Somebody needs to be looking at that. That's all.
Yes, that is on the Water and Sewer Advisory Committee's agenda to look into that, but they have not started that yet.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Dean. Okay, Alex, water capital,
Okay.
550, or is that it?
No, there's a big one.
Sure.
And that is for the construction of a permanent treatment facility to address PFAS
Yep.
at the training field wells 5 and 8.
Yep.
And at this time, we funded the design stage for $1.4 million at the 2021 annual town meeting.
Yep.
And it's coming to a close. The design engineering is, I think, almost done. I think Bob Rooney could probably speak to that more. But the estimate for the construction of a new permanent treatment facility is estimated at $19.8 million.
Okay. The HVAC system at the library pales in comparison. Just a little humor, a little tongue-in-cheek humor here.
And we'll have a detailed presentation at the workshop on February 9th. We'll have our consultants available so you could actually see what a belt filter press is and see, what this treatment facility is as well.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are large, and we need a strategy. We need to understand what we're buying and when and how and the whole bit. It's the big numbers, big numbers. We don't take these investments lightly, that's for sure. Okay. 19.8, Alex. That gets everybody's attention. Okay.
Yeah, it does. And, again, PFAS is, out there. We need to address it. Whether or not there'll be 0% loans available for PFAS, that is a possibility. I just heard that this past weekend, as well as, whether there's any grants out there to assist us would be great. So again, in advance of of the meeting for the capital items, we'll look to see what funding sources and any way we can mitigate any impact on water rates and or, our own budget.
Yeah, and the timing of the the availability of the SRF funds, the timing going forward, if we know it all, if there's any way we can discern whether or not those funds will be available in the future, I think is very important. Okay. All righty then. Thanks, Alex. Any other comments or questions for Alex on the budget?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say,
Yes.
it was pretty, I happened to have the book as you did.
Yeah.
It was pretty easy to follow that as Alex was showing the stuff on the screen. I was very helpful. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah,
And
it was
Jill,
good, Alex, thank you.
The book is
The book is amazing.
really helpful.
Book's amazing, to be honest with you.
Thank you.
I'm used to having tabs, so just, but anyway, I'm not complaining. It's a great job, great job.
I have a table of contents, so you can actually
Yeah,
find the page
table of
number.
contents is pretty cool. Okay, thank you, Alex, thank you, everybody. Next item on our agenda is the Nauset Beach Agreement, Memorandum of Agreement with the Town of Orleans. Dr. Duncanson, I think, is still on, and I know Shereen was able to make that last meeting with the town. The very few changes to this. Bob, if you could just briefly summarize where we are and what's being recommended.
Yes, as the chair indicated, the working group comprised of representatives from Chatham and Orleans were actually able to get together later in 2022, which was about 4 months earlier than we normally get together. They reviewed the current Nauset Beach IMA, and there was consensus to not recommend any changes to the current funding formula. If you remember, last spring, we entered into a 3-year agreement with Orleans and held the 75-25 revenue split for non-resident passes that are issued by Orleans. So that was good news. So there were no further changes proposed to that this year. The only change that was proposed, and that's the amendment that you have before you, was to simply indicate that you may remember last year I think it was the end of May, Orleans switched to a fiscal year formula for the beach stickers. And so we just wanted the IMA to represent that as well. So we are changing the date, the termination date of the agreement from April 30th of each year. In this case, it won't expire until April 30th of 2025, to basically shift that to June 30th of 2025. So that's the only change that's been proposed. You have that amendment before you. It's been reviewed by our town council and approved. And so the exact same agreement's been sent over to Orleans for their Board of Selectmen to review and approve as well.
Thank you, Dr.
Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bob. I'll look to Ms. Davis for a motion.
Yes, and I just want to make a note that it was a real pleasure to work with Orleans this year. It was, the communications was great and real efficiency between the staff, both Chatham and Orleans, so thank you for that. I move to approve and sign the Nauset Beach IMA Amendment Number 1.
And I will second that. And any comments? Okay.
It's probably great to get a 4-month heads up. The timing is usually very late on these things, and this is really nice to have it done and be behind us, so not have to worry about it. Very well done.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, we'll put it to a vote. Mr. Metters?
Aye.
Mr. Shell? Aye. Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Nacastro?
Aye.
And the chair says aye as well. Thank you very much. Shireen, thank you. Okay. Next, we have the town manager's report. Off to you, Jill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in your packet tonight, you had the town manager report for the month of December, which is our year end, if you wanted to keep that in mind as you're reviewing it. What's interesting in putting together the current items is we put so much out through the main sheet that there wasn't a lot of new items to report in the last couple of days of the week last week when we presented this. So we did have some additional reports come in, and we've uploaded that to the website since what was printed in your packet. But as we always do, we recognize the years of service and the anniversary dates, and we look forward. So with February, we have the notation of a few employees who have been here 18 years, Mike Murphy, Pam Jones, administrative assistant, and she's been essential, especially with this transitional period with our DPW director. So big shout out to her. And you'll note in the DPW monthly report, she did compile the irrigation survey responses, and so that's included in there. Our own Shauna Neely has been here for 16 years, as well as the other staffing from the various departments. Rachel, who's our shellfish propagation and deputy shellfish constable, Rhiannon, our police dispatcher, Debbie Mayhew, who's our COA secretary, Richard Corris, who's our facilities foreman. He was a recent internal promotion for that. Dallas, the person behind the window there for Channel 18, our assistant media coordinator, we're pointing to him for 2 years, and Cassandra Wetzel, who's one of our newer police officers for 2 years. And then we've had some new hires recently, January. So Annie Hayes, she just joined the Community Development Department as the newest department secretary. What's interesting about Annie is her former employer sent a note to Community Development just wishing her well and singing her praises of how much she had helped them with their business. And Annie has used our OpenGov and our online permitting as a customer, and now she's behind the scenes working to help other customers with that program. So we're really excited to have her. And then Tyler Baker just joined the Fire Rescue Department. He is a native Cape Codder, and he's recently worked with Brewster Fire. So we had a swearing-in ceremony for him. And then I have the various recruitments and job postings from our HR and benefits administrator. And Shauna's been working with her on interviewing a select board town manager's office administrative assistant and two postings for DPW superintendent and the council on aging outreach coordinator. Those are in the works of working through the job descriptions to make sure they match the duties that's presented before us. And then, as always, I have the how to subscribe to notifications, and this includes the emergency notifications, the main sheet, as well as we do our community voice and our community surveys, so that's an important item to include. So this has been updated a little bit, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Mr. DeCastro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jill. And congratulations to Shauna. I guess congratulations to us for having Shauna, as well as these other fine employees. Page 23, it's a question, but at the very bottom, on coastal resources, 90 Bridge Street, it refers to the building commissioner's project compliance denial letter regarding a floodplain codes. Is that our building commissioner issued a denial and then we've had to appeal to the state?
Yeah, and it was more procedural because it's in the floodplain, so that's why it was kicked over to being appealed by the state building codes.
Okay.
Board of Appeals.
Okay. Page 31, it's about a little more than a quarter down on these bulleted items. It says staff meeting with special counsel regarding waterways bylaw and AG decision. Did the AG have a question about the draft, about the town meeting vote on the waterways bylaw? Was that what that was about?
They did, and I believe that's posted on the town clerk's page or on mytowngovernment.org. So there was an appeal, by a private citizen to the AG's office, and there were just some questions about some of the questions by the AG, and I believe they were minor. I think that, Corey, I think you were on the call too. So there were a couple of things that we didn't need to bring back to town meeting at this time that we could address it administratively.
Okay.
They just have to look at it again.
And on the next question, on page 38, under system maintenance, this is the, I guess this is the water.
Yeah.
The last bulleted item, the SCADA system, so Verizon has ended 3G texting, so we're going to have to update our SCADA system to 4G. Is that, and purchase a modem? Is that what I'm understanding, in order that our system can work properly?
Yeah, and I
provide us
believe,
the data that we need to know?
I believe we had some advance notice for this, that they were discontinuing the 3G system. So that probably means that there was a meeting that they had in order to propose a replacement, and we just lost our interim DPW director, who could probably talk more about it.
It's okay. My final question relates, since this is the town manager's monthly report, something I saw, not in this document, but on the website of the town clerk. Well, the town clerk posted the dates and the annual election and so forth. She did include an updated version that recites the vacancy in the school district position that was held by Danielle Tolley, who just resigned, and we wish her well. She did a great job there. But I didn't quite understand it because it refers to a 1 year remaining on the term and that this would go to the annual town election. But you also have the agreement that authorizes the board, together with the remaining members of the committee, to fill the vacancy for the remainder of the term. So I'm not, can we get that clarified as to, are we going to do something? If it's going to a vote in May, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to try to fill it between now and then. But at the same time, I'm not sure that it does go to a vote. So perhaps you could ask Julie to clarify and let us know what's what. Thank you. I assume we haven't gotten the formal notification yet from the school district, because that's the trigger.
Right, we've only had the resignation from
Right.
the board member, but not from the school committee.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments for Jill? Okay, thank you, Jill. Great report. We have some committee appointments this evening. We have an Independence Day committee appointment for one vacancy to June 30th, 2025. Mr. Metters.
Sure, I move to appoint Thomas Campbell to the Independence Day Parade Committee until June 30th, 2025, unless sooner revoked or a successor is appointed.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Nacastro.
Aye.
Ms. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Shell.
Aye.
Mr. Metters.
Aye.
And the chair says aye as well. We have an appointment either to the Conservation Commission as an associate or to the Economic Development Committee. I'll take nominations from Mr. Daly.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I move to appoint Bill Daly to the Economic Development Committee until June 30th, 2025.
Second.
Okay, very good. Mr. Nacastro.
Aye.
Ms. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Shell.
Aye.
Mr. Metters.
Aye.
And the chair says aye as well. Congratulations, Mr. Daly. The Board of Health has recommended that the appointment of two members be changed, to Dr. Richard Edwards to full membership and Edward Sheehan to an alternate position. Both have current terms running till June 30th, 2023. A motion, please. Mr. Nacastro.
I move to appoint Dr. Richard Edwards as a full member to complete his current term to June 30th, 2023.
Second.
Okay, Mr. Metters.
Aye.
Mr. Shell.
Aye.
Ms. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Nacastro.
Aye.
And the chair says aye.
I move to appoint Edward Sheehan as an alternate member to complete his current term to June 30th, 2023.
Second.
Great. Mr. Metters.
Aye.
Mr. Shell.
Aye.
Ms. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Nacastro.
Aye.
And the chair says aye as well. Thank you very much. And that concludes our agenda for this evening. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Second.
Thank you very much. Mr. Metters.
Aye.
Mr. Shell.
Aye.
Ms. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Nacastro.
Aye.
And the chair says aye. Good night, Chatham. Thanks, everyone.